When my non-audiophile friends ask me what type of hi-fi should I buy at decent TV type price spending with all the streaming functionality built in, I'll always say something like KEF LSX speakers. They just give that separation and imaging that only 2-channel audio can bring. Soundbars, frankly, just don't cut it with that. But what about if we cross over into pro audio speakers? Well, Genelec are a brand that a lot of people will know, and they make a series of speakers called the G series, which traditionally does that in home audio. But what about their more studio-based SAM Studio Active Monitor 8330A speakers? So these speakers use Class D amplification, 50 watts into the 19mm treble driver, 50 watts into the bass driver, and because it's a digital active crossover in these speakers, you've effectively got different amplifiers for each of the drivers. Read my article in the card if you're a bit confused about this. Another feature that's pretty obvious from the case itself is the treble waveguide. I really like the raw metal finish in these speakers because so much of hi-fi can be boring and plain looking. Also, these speakers have a functional purpose because they get used in studios. So you can't really say they're ugly looking. Ugly would be a car that looks like it has a disease, not a pair of speakers that are in a metal finish. And we should really implore this good out-of-the-box design and doing something different. But if the raw finish isn't your bag, you can get them in dark grey and white finishes too. Two ways of connecting these speakers: analog connection or digital connection. Connection wise, the simplest way of using these speakers is to use the analog input from your DAC, streamer or preamp with a volume control. Obviously, if you're using a DAC, as soon as the analog gets to the analog inputs of these speakers, it's converted back into digital, so you're not going to be using your DAC itself. I actually use Cambridge Audio CXN version 2 as part of this test. It's XLR balanced output and preamp streaming volume control. But also if you use something like a Bluesound Node, you can use its coax output in digital configuration, so it's a digital volume, and then minimum and maximum set volume in BlueOS so you don't inadvertently damage your speakers. I actually think that you can get away with using a cheap streamer with these Genelecs because they're that good sounding. I've got a Vimeo mini streamer at the moment which I'm due to review. Unfortunately I can't use this because it doesn't have a coax output. But there's so many of these PI type streamers on the market at the moment with coax digital outputs that you could use with these Genelecs, and I think would be an awesome system. Digital connection wise, these Genelecs benefit from a 110 ohm connection. If you use an RCA to AES EBU type cable, you won't be getting 110 ohms. Most streamers output RCA coax digital, and BNC coax adapters are typically 75 ohms. So cue this Neutrik BNC to XLR impedance converter. I got mine from RS Components, then used two cheap Mogami AES EBU 110 ohm cables. Don't go crazy with really expensive hi-fi cables with these Genelecs. They simply don't need it, and they sound great with basic cables. Some hi-fi cable companies will see you coming.
This rusty old lantern is the type of complete toss she's into. It's on for £1,000. Should we start at £6,000?
Calibrating these speakers is the really geeky but enjoyable bit of buying these Genelecs using the GLM adapter and software. I was sent Genelec's wireless volume controller. This is the 9101B, which works, by the way, if you have your MacBook or laptop connected to the GLM adapter, and also the speakers are tethered to it via Ethernet as well. You won't need to buy this if you use a streamer that has a volume control. So be thinking BlueOS in Bluesound type devices, Music Cast on Yamaha, a whole plethora of others, and obviously Roon as well. So the first thing to say about sonic quality of these speakers, both kind of globally relative to all speakers and relative to KEF LSX speakers, is that they have a depth and accuracy that the KEFs can't match. There's also less coloration in these Genelecs, which the KEFs do too. And whilst the KEFs are better with forward and aft soundstage depth, which is also a trait of the LS50 Metas, they don't have that rawness and preciseness of these speakers. Okay, they're a little bit more expensive. £1,250 was the best price that I saw for these Genelecs, which actually excludes the GLM kit. That's the mic and adapter you have to buy as well. So I'm comparing these speakers to the KEFs in a similar price territory, depending upon how you look at it with all the ancillaries. So you've got to be thinking a real visceral experience with these speakers, and that's why I really love them. Despite the fact too that they aren't full range, the bass is pretty defined and self-contained and damped. And I think that if you added a really fast sub, it could be endgame and job done. And the age-old question, do you necessarily have to go crazy on hi-fi to get fantastic sound? Emphatically,
no, no, no.
And the gentleman is not for turning on that score. I can't believe I just did a Maggie Thatcher quip. There is slightly more fidelity I found if you use the digital connection spaciousness and clarity are the obvious things, and maybe that's to do with the fact there's no analog to digital conversion going on. So preferably I would use digital connection. If your source doesn't have an AES EBU digital output, then I'd recommend getting that impedance transformer or one similar to ensure that you meet the input specification of these speakers to get their best sound. In the past, I've been a bit of a traditionalist with speakers, not being a subwoofer person. But I kind of, if I bought these Genelecs, I would try a subwoofer because I get the ideal of using a very good quality active monitor with a subwoofer that fills out the sound. These speakers do make you really wonder, do you need to spend all that money on all your components in a passive speaker system when you can get actives this price and overcoming all the problems of passive speaker networks, and the fact that the musical enjoyment that you can get from them are so damn good. In my local music shop called Guitar Amplifier Keyboard Centre in Brighton, UK, of a range of Genelecs I actually tried, I thought these were probably the sweet spot just for bass and control. That was only a quick shop listen mine. But if you're in the market for buying something like KEF LSX, I'd recommend trying these Genelecs first on your shortlist, especially if you're going to be using them with a cheap streamer with a digital out, which I think is going to get you great value for money. They are ridiculously good value, these speakers, and as I've said before, more than any God-given right, and I'm not even religious. Another thing I'd like to say is that they're not just near-field listening monitors, and obviously you're going to see them online in literature on Genelec's website being used in studios on a desk, but there's no technical reason whatsoever that you can't use them in a hi-fi couch setup. In fact, they're meant for home cinema too, and sound is fantastic as traditional 2-channel hi-fi speakers in any event. Another thing in buying these speakers is the room correction technology, which isn't to be underestimated. But if you want the sound quality that actives bring, you're prepared to spend a decent amount, but you're not wanting to go crazy, these are definitely the speakers for you. They come extremely recommended.